September 20th, 2022. Planning board meeting. We are being recorded via WinCam and via Zoom. If you do not wish to appear on the recording, please turn off your video and mute your microphone. Why don't we do a roll call vote to get ourselves in with a quorum? Nick Rosettos.
Here.
I-Ching Scott.
Present.
Kurt Spring.
Present.
Sally Dale.
I'm here.
And I, the chair, Diabjerius, am here as well. We also have with us town planner Brian Sekeli, our recording secretary Nancy Polcari, and where did oh, there he is, Brian Manter, assistant town engineer. Your little picture moved around, Brian. I couldn't find you. Okay, so why don't we jump right into our meeting? We have brief opening remarks. We're going to be talking very briefly about what's happening with the North Main Street and the Holton Cross Swanton projects. We've got a review of a change in a facade in the Center Business District, and then we're going to jump into meeting with the ZBA and with Town Council to talk about some zoning bylaw matters. And then later on this evening, we'll be talking about motions, articles coming before this fall town meeting, in particular, the article concerning the creation of the permitting by right of accessory dwelling units. So why don't we start with Brian? Brian, do you want to say something? Do you have any updates for us?
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest update I had actually mentioned in my weekly updates this past Friday. This is in relation to the MBTA multifamily zoning requirement. The final guidelines got released a few weeks ago, and there have been now a series of, and there will be more series of webinars from the state to kind of usher cities and towns through this process. The big news of the week related to this was that many municipalities were kind of like debating of like, oh, should we comply? Is this something that we really could do? And the state has been now very clear this time around in the final guidelines that this multifamily zoning is a requirement. It is a shall. It is that these municipalities shall do this. Previously, it was kind of seen as that if you don't do this, then you can't apply for these 3 buckets of funding that are certainly big buckets of funding. But now they're saying that not only will it affect those that are very clear that you can't even apply for those buckets of funding, now they're saying that, well, if you don't do this, that it could affect other types of applications at the state level. So they want to make it very clear, the state, they want to make it very clear that this is not something to debate on if municipalities should comply, it's you need to comply. So that's kind of a different stance than they've been. I shouldn't say different stance. It hasn't been nearly that forceful. It's more been like, see if, try to comply. This is what happens if you don't comply. Now it's, you must comply, whether or not you want that funding or not. So it's kind of a difference, a slightly different stance, but an important one that I don't think, well, I certainly wasn't aware of that. And I think a lot of other people that were not aware of that either, because the question came up. So I'll stop there for now, but if anyone has any questions on 3A, now would be a good time.
I just want to point out that I think we're going to have a meeting with council on Thursday during the town council's office hours, and this will be part of our discussion. So that's just a quick get together between Brian, myself, and our vice chair. Where's our vice chair, Sally? And then after that discussion, we'll be bringing that forward to the planning board, just so we can get the ball started on that.
Brian, do you have other updates?
The other two updates that we're going to talk about were North Main Street and Holton and Cross, which are the next agenda items. But if anyone had any questions, I guess, about that, or yeah, go for it.
I have one. I just wanted to know how we're doing with setting up the master plan implementation committee.
Sure. So I believe the last step to set that up was the student rep. And I believe Diab was working with the someone from the school committee and the moderator. Diab, if you want to.
Yeah, actually, that's all. I have sort of been partly AWOL the last several weeks for personal reasons. So I've just reached out to the town moderator and Anthea Brady from the select board, who are the two other members of the for the youth rep selection. We have two candidates that we want to interview. And I'm hoping we can get that done soon. So my apologies. But
No, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Diab, thank you for that update.
I feel bad. This should have been done earlier. So my apologies.
And I had one other quick question, Brian. I noted that the owner of Mount Vernon Street, the 10 to 16, Mount Vernon, was going to be coming in front of the planning board, but I don't know if that's happening sooner or later.
So I do know that so they actually were in front of the historical commission last
Good.
meeting.
Good.
Unfortunately, I had to leave that meeting to go up to the select board.
Oh yeah.
Like right at the time the 10 to 16 Mount Vernon was on. So I know I think they want to make historical commission happy before they move on to another pre-application meeting potentially with the planning board.
That's why I said good.
Yeah, and I can send around those minutes from the historical commission if you haven't received them with the proposed third floor that they have for that building and what the historical commission's comments were. So I can send that around.
Yeah, good.
Can you, for those of us who whose memory of where 10 to whatever Von Vernon, not Vernon Street, where that is, I'm having a real blank in my head. Can you tell me which building that is?
Sure. So that is the
Without
building
the vermin.
with the Pondview Florist right on the corner there.
Okay.
Directly next to the public safety building, or right across, or sorry, North Mark Bank. Sorry.
Okay.
I can get it up, but yeah, it's currently
that's fine.
currently a two-story, and they've tried, I would say, twice now over the past 5 years, to try to get something to work there.
I believe that the building it's considered a kind of a sensitive example of a historical building. So
it's a red building according to our zoning.
It's not only red, but among the red buildings, it's one of the very sensitive buildings. So I think that it is going to warrant, more scrutiny, which I think is appropriate.
Well, I think they're all the buildings that are deemed historically significant that are quote red in the have to be treated the same, to be honest.
Well, no, there are different grades of building. I mean, if you look at them.
Well, it certainly has gotten a lot of scrutiny because this is their third bite at the apple. So it's not that we have had many discussions, and I have the feeling we're going to continue. So, Nick, I think it will get scrutiny.
I mean, there is a constituency, a broad constituency that's not as loud as the builder community that values a certain look. So I think that's appropriate. I think it's an appropriate conversation for us to be having.
Okay. Any further updates? If not, we can jump right. Excellent. So why don't we jump into North Main Street and Holton Cross Swanton? And this is just a brief update. We're not going to go into deep discussion on this.
Yeah, this is
Brian.
kind of just an update on a little bit of admin and then kind of go from there. So I'll start with North Main Street. So we had, what is it? So it was around March, it's about 6 months ago, when we were kind of close to finishing up the phase 1 of the North Main Street work with Form in Place. That we decided that we wanted to have a couple of 2 community meetings in the fall. And right now we are about 3 to 4 weeks behind that initial schedule. That doesn't really affect the project that much, simply because we have about $30,000 for this portion for this year, $30,000 for Form in Place for that contract. Right now they're in contact with the engineering department to get these detailed street plans in order to do test fits. So they're basically trying to see what types of buildings could fit and how they could look on, in plan. For several key parcels in the district right now, they're going to be starting to look from Clark Street south. So there's that kind of first chunk of the GBD2. And the idea here is that out of these potential test fits and getting planning board feedback and other community feedback to try to develop design guidelines. Now, there's a lot of things that are at play here other than just the design guidelines. We obviously have 2 other big things. One is the actual zoning, what is going to be allowed, how tall, how many units, all of that. And the other is specifically how that zoning ties in to 3A towards the multifamily zoning that we're trying to do. So we did not hire Form in Place to try to figure out how to make this zone, part of the multifamily district. We really where they're going to shine is doing these test fits, helping us with the design guidelines and finding out what we want it to look like, and what the town wants this area to look like. And then I think the next part is to be working with legal counsel to potentially finish that zoning. But I think that where Form in Place is going to shine the most is through helping us get the aesthetic that the town and the planning board is looking for, rather than try to see how we can squeeze that in to be compliant with 3A. Because I think that's the other way around, meaning that I think we want to figure out what we want these intersections and parcels and buildings to look like, and then have the zoning stem from that. So that's a few things there.
Brian, if I can interrupt.
Well, I mean, can we have zoning that has a number of units be separate from how the buildings look? That's sort of confusing to me.
Sure.
Or what do you mean by related. How they look? Yeah, I guess is what I'm asking.
So design guidelines or design standards are going to be very similar in terms of how they what they look like in terms of on the page as the design standards and guidelines that we have for the center business district. So it's talking about proportions of windows, it's talking about materials, but the zoning and the density, it's kind of hard to kind of completely disjoint that from how the buildings are going to look. A 15 unit per acre building is going to look different than a 30 unit per acre building. It's just the bulk of it's going to be different. So they're certainly related. I'm just saying that I don't think Form in Place is going to be completely writing the zoning now. I think they're going to be working on the design standards and what these streets should or could look like, and trying to get feedback from the community and from the planning board.
Great, thanks.
Brian,
yes.
If I could interrupt real quickly, because we were already 5 minutes behind. Do we have anyone from 14 Thompson Street with us tonight?
I did invite them. They said that they were going to come. Let me see if I have anything from them recently, but I did. They did mention that they were going to be here.
Okay, if they are not here, then why don't we
I can keep going with the IL. They're certainly not here at the moment.
Why don't you go with Holton Cross Lawton?
Sure. So Holton Cross Swanton, which corresponds to the IL zoning district, otherwise known as the light industrial zoning district. We have contracted with MAPC for a smaller fee of $15,000 to kind of to start the next phase of start the first phase of that project. Right now, there is still a survey that is open, and I'm going to be putting that up on the website. It's open until October 14th, and this is a survey for people not just who live or work in that zone or near that zone, but it's really for anybody to take. So I'm gonna get that up, and if anyone is interested, they can email me, but I'm going to get it up on the planning board page. It was up towards the end of last fiscal year, but we've decided to keep it open to get some more feedback. Again, this project at the moment is only $15,000, which will go relatively quickly. That basically corresponds to a couple of community meetings and a couple of or more than a couple, many stakeholder interviews. So this is with people who either live in or near the district, as well as a whole bunch of businesses that are located in there. So that scope for the phase 2 was outlined at the beginning of phase 1. And like I said, it's going to have some more focus group meetings and then prepare a set of recommendations and community workshop number 2 to happen sometime. It was going to be middle of fall, but now it looks like it's going to be more like late fall. And originally this work was supposed to finish in November, but really it's more like kind of leading up. It would really be more likely finish at the end of winter or just before the end of winter, leading up to a fall 2023 town meeting zoning article for this area. So right now, MAPC is currently determining staffing for the project to see exactly when that we all can start. They've already committed to it, but they just need to work out like who would be assisting Josh in this work at the community meetings and the stakeholder interviews. So that's the big or only real update related to the IL. Does anyone have any questions about Holton Cross Swanton or the IL zoning district? Okay, that's a no. Well, I'm going to quickly check my email here to see if the applicant from 14 Thompson had emailed me again.
I have a question about 14 Thompson, about the procedure.
Sure.
So up until now, it's been sort of all the discussion has kind of been pre-site plan review. So when do we actually have the site plan review? According to section 7.3.15, where they say that a site plan review is applicable for all projects for which building permit for exterior work is required, which obviously this is. Mm-hmm. So when is that? It seems like now's the time, or do we need more time in pre-site plan review?
Well, this is not pre-site plan review. So what's happening right now is that they have been put on the agenda for the design review committee, I believe October 3rd.
Oh, right. We need their we need a report.
Yeah, well, even just minutes. But you bring up a good point in terms of talking about the process. So like you said, this is a by right project that requires design review because there is a building permit for exterior work in the center business district.
So it's kind of hybrid, like by right would suggest that there's no review.
No, I wouldn't use the word hybrid. I was saying it's a by right project, but we're allowed to put reasonable conditions on the permit. So we cannot deny it. It's not a special permit. We cannot deny it. No, right. This is technically it is our decision to put. So, for instance, the design review and historical commission, they cannot put conditions on the permit. We put the conditions on the permit based on their feedback.
So, for example, the situation about the door, which I don't know, it might have been an oversight on their part, but it seems that the removal was fairly significant to everyone that looked at
I
it.
believe the applicant is just here. So I'm going to turn it back over to Diab and let Iverson in, who is the applicant for 14 Thompson Street. But just so we're clear, this is not a ZBA permit. This is a by right design review that we are running. And we are going to be waiting at least until October 3rd when we hear from the design review. At the moment, the Historical Commission, they had a question about the door, the same question that we had.
But we do get to have the site plan review. I mean, that's a privilege that we have.
Yes, we are not, we're not there yet.
Okay. No, that's really helpful.
Okay, so who do we have? We have a whole bunch of people. Okay, so we do have a hard deadline of 7:35 for this. So unfortunate. So who is?
I believe Iverson. We are going to be talking, hello. We're going to be talking about 14 Thompson Street, you being the applicant, welcome. It's my
You're on
understanding.
mute. Iverson is on mute.
Hi guys. Yeah.
Hi, Iverson.
Thank you.
So it's my understanding you're going to be in front of the design review committee on October 3rd. That's correct. And are you scheduled yet for the Historical Commission at their next meeting, or have they reached out to you?
No, I haven't heard about anything.
Okay.
From the committee yet.
All right. Well, I will talk with the chair of the Historical Commission, but we just went over the process a little bit, and then I'll just bring you in real quick. But so you applied for a building permit through the building department. That triggered a review by the planning board because this is a project for a building permit for exterior work in the center business district. That triggers design review and site plan review with the planning board. So what we're allowed to do here is to put what's called reasonable conditions on the permit. We cannot deny the permit because it is a by right project according to the zoning bylaw. What we're going to be doing is waiting for the design review to give us their comments. The design review and the Historical Commission can give recommendations, but the planning board is the one who actually decides on what conditions could or would be put on the permit. Right now, this is kind of like a quick check-in. We had a couple of quick questions for you based upon our initial review. One being, well, I'll turn it back over to the chair, Diab Jarius, I guess. But one question that we did have was about the door that was not on the plans, and we can bring up those plans. It looked like there was a door that was removed.
Yeah, why don't you bring those up, Ryan?
Yeah, give me a minute and I will bring those up.
Yeah. So I'm sorry you joined us a bit late because we do have a hard deadline at 7:35. So very quickly, at the planning board's last meeting, we went over your design, the exterior design. There were a number of questions, in particular concerning the door that's being removed to the left of the main entrance. And I believe someone else has mentioned that. So that was not shown on your original conditions drawing, but it is there and it looks like it's gone. So the question is, was that an oversight? Do you intend to remove that door? And
if you guys are familiar with the 14 Thompson Street, that door has been sitting there for years, and for some reason that door just like a part of a decoration. Actually, it's not functioning door. Basically, behind the door that was the spot, the kitchen.
Okay, but we're not concerned as an exterior thing. What we're concerned about is what the overall look of the building looks like before and after. And
okay.
So first of all, your drawing doesn't have it in the existing conditions.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so that's an error on your drawing.
Okay.
So whether it is a functioning door or not, it does relate to the streetscape. So we understand. So that's an important thing that I think this board was concerned about its loss.
Yeah, it might be helpful to think about the design with the door remaining and see how that works.
And the other question that we had was we'd like to know what the constraints are. Why couldn't you reuse the existing door? Because that would allow, I understand, that would allow the functioning door that's now in the front, in the middle, why that couldn't be used.
The reason why, because the spot, it only it was narrower when you entering the restaurant. On the right of the door, the old door, there was the what is it called? It's a real estate office. So now my landlord allow me to combine these two spaces together. Then we can create a much bigger dining area for the bar and for the bar seating. So that's the reason why we wanted to move the front entrance door a little bit further from the from this one. And also it's related to the egress, because we're using the egress of the side of the building. So that's the reason why.
Okay, does any quick questions from the board? Again, this is not the actual.
I guess I would add that we're all excited to have this restaurant in town. It's got a good reputation.
Thank you.
I do
Go
have
ahead,
a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So this is my first time on talking on the board about this, but I just wanted to look at this elevation drawing that's up right now, and that the existing omitted door is to the left of the proposed main door, and this panel, metal panel to the left, is that just overlaid on it, or is the existing door going to be demolished? Is my question. Is the door just covering it, or is the door demolished and brick put over it, and then the panel on top?
So what we're planning, we want to have a two big antique, what is it called, antique copper plate as a part of decoration. So we are just planning just like a mounted security on the wall. It's we are probably not gonna demolish the existing door. We just like cover it on the top of it.
Right. I mean, I think that was one of the concerns, is whether or not this was going to be a permanent alteration, or if this panel is just covering it. I don't think that would be a permanent alteration.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
The word is freely removable. If the panel is freely removable, that's a positive.
So to my observation here, there aren't that many changes, and the current opening and the proposed opening seems to be centered to that bay, and it feels right to me in terms of the organization of the restaurant, the opening face for the restaurant. It all seems good and well. And then the two going to the right, that window seems temporary, or sort of not a part of the original design. The existing front doors now don't seem to be part of the original design. And the big window to the right of that, seems unaltered. And then the door to the right of it seems to be, unaltered too. I mean, it seems like the Historical Commission is concerned with the fan light transom. I mean, it's fine, keep the fan light transom, I think, but I'm not completely certain what the concerns are, in that, to my eyes, this seems like a reasonable alteration, removable, and doesn't completely alter the design per se of the original building. So that's mostly my observation.
Okay, any comments from the rest of the board?
My comment is that I'm very eager to see what design review and historic say before I opine, because I have my own thoughts, but I don't think they're substantive right now.
Well, do you have any questions?
Nope.
For the applicant?
Nope.
And then if no one has any questions, Mr. Iverson, do you have any questions for us?
Nope.
Okay, so you understand the process. We're all sitting and waiting on
I have
the
a
other
quick
two
one.
committees. Oh,
I
you
have
got
a
a
really quick
question.
one.
Yeah.
So this part of the building permit clearly doesn't need to happen for the building to for the restaurant to open. But what is your timeline for opening the restaurant if you had a magic wand in reality, meaning in terms of the actual time that would take for you to do the internal renovations and to go through this process? What is your timeline?
So first of all, I don't know how long will that take. I can get my building permit. So typically, building a size like a restaurant probably going to take a good 6 months. As you guys know that we are experiencing like a supply chain issue. I heard we are replacing all the rooftop unit. They said first available date gonna be next year February. For the carrier rooftop units. Unfortunately, that's nothing we can do about it. But we are still gonna finish the interior, the ductwork. We might leave that the rooftop unit replacement next year. Other than that, I mean, yeah, like 6 months. That's my target date.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no further comments, then we're back on schedule, and we will see you folks in what's the docket, Brian? Sometime early October?
Yeah, so it'll be one of our 2 meetings in October, but I'm going to put Iverson in touch with the historical commission. I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet, because they did review it. So I'll make sure that loop gets closed and that everyone has all the information they need going forward after October 3rd.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, Iverson. Really appreciate it. I'll be in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice meeting you guys. Thank you.
Good. Our next agenda is our meeting with council and joint meeting with the ZBA. Do we have council? We don't have council.
Not yet. I will see what's going on there.
So I see a whole bunch of other people have shown up, and I assume you folks are all from the ZBA.
I actually think we can go ahead here. I mean, when he gets here, he'll get here.
Yep.
If that's okay with you, Diab.
Oh yeah, I was about to say, do you want to do roll call and we can get this joint meeting going?
Yeah. So all of the sitting members of the Board of Appeals are here. I'll introduce them. The regular members are me, Robert Tedesco, and William McGonigal. And the 2 sitting alternate members are Dorothy Simboli and Gerard Marino. I appreciate your arranging this joint meeting.
Oh, well, I'm really...
There's one other thing I want to say to the members of the Board of Appeals, if it isn't already obvious, and you should hear this too, Diab. We're not able to talk about any active project that's before us, either before us or is under appeal, or I would say is potentially under appeal because it's that recent. And so our members will be very cautious about that, and the conversation is going to have to be general. But I think that's okay. I think that works.
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
I see town council is here, Jay Tylerman. Hello, Jay.
Yes, hi. So yes, I think that we are looking towards, we're going to be discussing bylaws and things of that nature. So hopefully we will not stray into any areas that would be problematic for the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I'd like to thank you, David, for reaching out and pushing me to get this going. I appreciate that. Welcome to the ZBA members. And So I think what we have laid out for us, Brian, if you want to pop up, we do have some specific things that, oh, and I should say, everyone, welcome to Jay Tellerman, new town council. Do you want us to go around and introduce ourselves to you, or is there just too many people to deal with at once?
I probably won't remember, but everyone's name is on their picture, so that it
Yeah.
should work out okay.
Okay, great. Brian, do you want to? We on the agenda. We had a couple of things we wanted to talk about.
Sure.
And I think.
Yeah, I can introduce it and then hand it over to Jay about. No, I'll just do that. So, our first topic is talking about the difference between a special permit and a variance. These are under two very different types of review criteria. You can grant a special permit essentially if it's in the best interest of the town or the neighborhood. That's very blunt in terms of how that but that's just an easy way to say it. A variance, you can grant a variance only under three specific situations. That there's something different about this specific lot or house, and it has to relate to the soil, topography, or shape of the lot. So it's a very big difference between granting a special permit and granting a variance. Variances tend to not be granted very much because usually there's not necessarily something that's very different about one house compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Okay, so here's the crux of the issue. Prior to 2012, in 2012, there was a recodification of the entire zoning bylaw. Prior to 2012, if you had a non-conforming property, let's say a left side setback, and you wanted to introduce a right side setback encroachment, that would have been a variance prior to 2012. Once 2012 hit, this recodification, everything then got put under this umbrella of a special permit. So if you had a left side encroachment, your house was too close to the left side setback, you were then kind of put under this umbrella of a special permit for any other type of nonconformity. And this herein lies. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Jay, because there was a court case that kind of put this more to the forefront of ZBAs and other special permit granting authority. Jay, just to make sure, did I get all of that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the time, it appears that what the town was trying to do was kind of follow the precedent that had been kind of growing from the early aughts through like 2012, which kind of restructured the way zoning boards would be reviewing extensions on pre-existing non-conformings. And I think you were making it consistent with that and perhaps adding a little bit more local relief, or a little bit more of an avenue for local relief as it existed at that time in case law.
Can I jump in here? So can you show my slide, Brian?
Sure. So
I spent an inordinate amount of time wading through the actual wording of section, is it 3.5, I believe, trying to understand what it was about. And because in part, I think I was the one who raised this issue, partly out of some comments I got from other my board members. And I was concerned about whether there was an inconsistency or a conflict in the wording of 3.5 between the application of variances and special permits. And after I spent an inordinate amount of time looking at it, I've concluded that it's all very consistent and it's all pretty clear. And this slide is my personal slide. Nobody in the Board of Appeals has even seen this, but it's my personal view, and they're going to have comments, or they're free to comment on this. But I just wanted to walk through this because I think it's quite clear, and I'm of the view that we really probably don't need to discuss this much further. So Section 3 is important because it refers to non-conforming structures. It's all about non-conforming structures and uses. And why is that important? Because they are pretty common in Winchester, as I suppose they are in other towns. And in the 18 months that I've been on the board, I see that a very substantial proportion of the applications that come to us are proposals for changes to non-conforming structures. So this really matters. And the question is, how does the section deal with variances versus special permits? And I just repeat here what I said orally, which is I think it's internally consistent and appropriate. It all makes sense. So the central question in differentiating them under section 3.5 is whether the proposed change, and this is pretty much language out of the bylaw, whether the proposed change to the nonconformity will increase the existing nonconformity or create a new nonconformity. That's 3.5.4. And then in 3.5.5, there's some wording that's it's similar. It sort of grabs the same idea. It says, will increase the non-conforming nature of said structure. So it's pretty simple. If there's an increase in the non-conforming nature under 3.5.4, then you need a variance. It's explicit. It's couldn't be clearer. There's an exception that has to do with the extension of an exterior wall. So if you're encroaching on a side yard, say by 4 feet in a non-conforming part of your building, and you want to build your exterior wall further along that line, then that's the exception. And if there's no increase in the non-conforming nature of the proposal, then, and this is my last main bullet, in certain cases where that's true, there's no increase in the non-conforming nature of what's being proposed, then in certain cases where the reconstruction, extension, alteration, or change will comply with current setback. Basically, if you're going to do something that is going to end up with compliance with the current rules, the building commissioner can determine that, and you're done. There's no variance, no special permit. And then there's a section that was added, I think in 2017, that's captured in my last bullet and says, in other cases of no increase in non-conforming nature, because there could be other cases, the Board of Appeals can grant a special permit. So that's the whole enchilada. If you're non-conforming nature, if you're increasing the non-conforming nature by what you're proposing, you need a variance. If you're not, and the building commissioner can get rid of a lot of them based on complying with current rules, done. And if he can't, then the Board of Appeals can take it up and grant a special permit. So that's my interpretation, and everybody else has their shot at saying what they think, but I think it's pretty clear, and I don't think there's much point in discussing it further, but people are free to do that.
Well, to be honest, I mean, essentially, I think what you're saying is that we have been permitting things under special permits for a long time, which should have been done as variances. And that's actually a wholesale change.
To be honest, it looks that way to me, yes. But
so I think there is a lot of discussion we need to go into, because that's a sea change, and I think how these things have been handled. So Jay,
so
can you
I mean, just because I've seen a lot of these cases come in front of us, so I'm not commenting on any one particular case, but I'm just going to give you a hypothetical. So let's say somebody's got a garage that a detached garage, which is literally sitting right on the property line, maybe even encroaching over the property line. And they want to add an attached garage. They want to tear down that garage and they want to add attached garage, which will be a different type of nonconformity. It will still encroach on the setback, although it won't encroach as badly on the setback as the existing detached garage. That is a case where, in my opinion, a special permit would be applied for, and then we would undergo that analysis, especially using the language in the last paragraph of 355, which, uses that language. It will allow such reconstruction, extension, alteration, or change, which is very all-encompassing, where it determines, meaning the board, that the proposed modification will not be substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming structure to the neighborhood. So I believe that that is why there's a little bit of gray that's been worked into 355. And that's just my own, sort of in my own observation about homes in Winchester, which were built many, many years ago, where they are pre-existing non-conforming and people are trying to make them more current and useful in today's living standards. But because of the lot size, they simply can't obviously comply with the current setbacks that would be required for a new construction. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that.
Hmm.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Where there is a lot of gray area here in reality. And I mean, I think we'd have to look back on some of the decisions that were made and written and sort of look at the facts of those, because I think and I would love to actually understand who wrote this and what their reasoning was behind writing this language, because I think it was specific to address some of those situations and allow a little bit more flexibility. I know in other towns, it is certainly not as flexible, but
So
I think it's worked in Winchester. Has it been abused? I don't know. I mean, that's not my place to say whether it's been abused, but I think it's really allowed people to sort of bring their properties more current with current ways of living and still, been respectful of the neighbors and making sure that, as much of a setback can be left on some of those alterations.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to hear what Jay has to say about this in terms
Sure,
of
let me jump in a little bit, and some of it's going to be somewhat. There's going to be some conjecture involved because I don't think any of us know exactly what everyone had in their head in 2012. So first of all, that example that was just given regarding the detached garage to the attached garage, I want to hold that one in abeyance because that's a more complicated zoning question, because detached garages don't get the benefit of single and two family house exceptions. So, but I get the point entirely. It's not the example I might want to give there because it adds an additional layer of complexity. Okay, so just a little bit of what I understand from the history, having done and participated in a lot of these cases and been one of the litigators on at least one of the key cases. So beginning with the Bransford case, the Edgartown case, going through the Bjorklund case, and then finally just before 2012, I believe, the Gale versus Gloucester case, which was around the time that this bylaw was drafted. The evolution of those cases started with kind of conforming structure on a non-conforming lot is a non-conforming structure. So they might need a special permit for any increase. Bjorklund kind of expanded a little on that. And then the Gale case, which is key because it was the closest in time prior to the adoption of this bylaw, said, okay, here's the deal. Any change you have is just a special permit. That's just what it is. Now the zone, it says if you follow the cases up through, the building commissioner can still make a call if it's so de minimis, essentially. And they use the example, I think in one of those cases, of a portico or a dormer or something like that. If it's so de minimis, the building commissioner can make the call on that. But otherwise, everything's a special permit. And that's the way it was when this was drafted. And us zoning lawyers, or kind of had mixed feelings about some of this. But then the next case dropped right after Gale and right after this bylaw, and that's the Deirdre case from out of Chatham. And I was town council just while that case was going through the process of the appeals. I became town council in Chatham. And what that case says is, okay, Gale versus Gloucester is 100% correct, except where you add a new nonconformity. And in that case, the example was height. We had a pre-existing non-conforming structure, but the height was conforming. And then someone wanted to go up a little bit beyond what the height allowed in town. So they said, well, Gale versus Gloucester doesn't apply because those apply to alterations to some part of a structure that's already non-conforming. If you're adding a new non-conformity, there's a variance. So that kind of threw some chaos into it and would lead to perhaps competing interpretations of section 3.55. So that's kind of where the cases happened and why the addition of the Deirdre case kind of gives some level of pause when you start reading all the sections of 3.55 together. However, let me back up a little bit. And this is just a guess as to where I think we were and perhaps what the impetus was here for 3.55 as it currently exists. My guess, again, just a guess, is that it wasn't so much focused on trying to mimic Gale versus Gloucester. Rather, it looks to me like it was an effort to follow Gale versus Gloucester, but specifically list out, in this case, 3 categories where the building commissioner could make the call as to something that wouldn't increase the pre-existing non-conforming nature, thereby letting that go with a mere building permit. And I've seen a lot of bylaws that have similar structure. This one's obviously a little bit different, but after those line of cases, a lot of towns said, okay, so the building commissioner has some, let's see if we can rein in and provide some parameters for the building department and develop some criteria that would help them. A lot of towns went with and enshrined it either in policies and procedures or their bylaw itself. They went with a 25% rule. Anything more than 25% increase in square footage is fine, or anything less than that is fine. Anything more than that's going to require a special permit. I have some issues with those bylaws, but there's a bunch of them. But a bunch of towns did try and kind of carve out an area where the building commissioner could make a call, thereby sparing a certain class of homeowners from having to go to the zoning board of appeals in every instance. So I think that may be of the impetus here. Now, moving forward to now we have the Deirdre case, and how do we interpret that with this particular language? And I'm going to sit here and tell you that it is not clear and it is not black and white as I see it. Particularly, I think a court would be struck with the words "in any other case." Don't forget, 355 is, even though we can look to 354, 353 in the prior sections for some clues as to word use, 355 singularly applies to single and 2-family houses, which is the kind of the lion's share of the case law that we talk about. So it really is kind of on an island a little bit in terms of how we have to approach it. And it's hard for me. I think I could perhaps support a definition. And ultimately, let me just state, it's not what Jay Tallerman thinks your bylaw is saying. Ultimately, the entities interpreting the bylaw are going to be given deference provided the interpretation is reasonable. If you want to straighten this bylaw out and have it go one way or the other along this kind of thing, are we sending people to variances or are we going to do it all by special permit? You may want to, and I've suggested one potential change, you may want to move it in one direction or the other. But it would be hard for me if you said to someone, oh, you need a variance for that. Their opposition to that is going to be, I can't interpret in any other case in any other way except meaning everything that's not listed above, everything. And that's kind of where it gets kind of interesting here, because even though I might be able to say to a judge, if someone had a different interpretation, well, this was written before Deirdre, and in any other case doesn't really mean any other case. And it doesn't include the term addition of new nonconformities, and the word change shouldn't be interpreted as the same thing as no additional nonconformities. A contrary interpretation is possible, and it's really possible that a judge, and judges are different and have different looks at this, that they say in any other case means exactly that. Anything that isn't 1, 2, and 3 is just a special permit. So I'm not sitting here telling you which way you should go. It seems to me, based upon what I've been discussing with staff and some other folks in town, that the predisposition until somewhat recently was to interpret it as in any other case. So really a variance would never apply. If that's the way you want to keep it, then I would suggest clearing it up a little bit. If you want to tilt in the other direction and require variances for new nonconformities, then I think we should be clear about that too, because I think there's some ambiguity here.
There's an actual, I'm thinking of a case that we had several years ago, so hopefully it's beyond any sort of appeals, but I'm now confused as to which way the current language would allow us to go. And this was a house which was on a very narrow lot, so the building itself was non-conforming in terms of its setback. And they wanted to essentially add on to the side of the house a new entryway, which would, by its very nature, because it was already in the setback, be further non-conforming.
That's just a special permit at most.
So that doesn't increase the nonconformity because
it's not increasing nonconformities that we're concerned about here. Increase of of an existing. So you're already in a setback already. You're already in violation. If you increase that violation, that's just a special permit.
So
if you're in violation on one side setback, but the other side setback is conforming, and you want to push that side and create into the setback and create a new nonconformity on the other side of the house, under Deirdre, that would be a variance. So there's a distinction.
When you explain,
I thought I heard David have a comment.
Yeah, I just want to have one quick follow-up.
Yeah, let's just finish the thought here.
I'll just finish. So it's not the size of the setback violation, it's just the very nature that there is one.
Well, again, notwithstanding sections 1, 2, and 3 here, but yeah, if there is one, you have to follow. What are they expanding? Are they expanding upon an already non-conforming aspect of the single or two-family house, or are they creating a brand new non-conformity that didn't previously exist?
Okay, so
the latter of which, under the case law, is a variance. The former of which is a mere special permit. Which, as Brian said, there's a vast difference there in between the two.
Okay, so you just have to check the box and say, I'm intruding on the setback in this side. It doesn't matter if I take that intrusion and push it all the way to the fence.
All the way to the lot line.
It'll still be, okay, thank you. That was, and someone else was going to jump in, please. David.
So I'm having trouble with this. What you're saying is that the first sentence of 3.5.4 means nothing. Basically, you're saying that's been written out of the bylaw, but it's in the bylaw. So
I wouldn't say it's been written out.
So what does it mean? It says, let me just read it. The reconstruction, extension, or structural change of a non-conforming structure in such a manner as to increase an existing nonconformity, which would be the case where there is a nonconformity straddling the side yard, and now you want to push it further into the side yard. That's an increase in an existing nonconformity by my reading. But you seem to say that, no, that's out. Forget
so the
that.
first part of that,
the...
if there was no 355, the first part of that would be incorrect as a matter of law as it applies to single and two family structures. That would be wrong and unenforceable. The second part of it, if it applied to single or two-family structures, would be an accurate assessment of the law after the Deirdre case, that is, creating of a new nonconformity. However, the narrow controls the general when we're interpreting statutes and bylaws. And we know that there are two different forms of consideration of pre-existing nonconformities as they apply to single and two-family houses and all other kinds of structures. And 355, like a lot of bylaws, and certainly like the statute, is narrow and says, okay, it doesn't say this, obviously, it says, this applies just to single and two-family structures. So it's more narrow. And I think what it says there could be interpreted as essentially saying, okay, 354 is great for a local garage or a bodega or something, but 355 is uniquely applying and providing substantially more benefits to single and two-family structures, which the statute does too. So I get, and I did look at 354, and that's one of the reasons why I think that there's some ambiguity, because it does include language regarding creation of new nonconformities where no such language is included in 355. Generally, a rule of statutory interpretation is that where it's omitted from a particular section, that omission is deemed to be purposeful. But I'm still taken with the language in the last paragraph of 355 that says in any other case, because it's pretty all-consuming. And to the extent the reviewing board of an application, the Zoning Board of Appeals, denied someone a special permit because they felt they needed a variance, I think there is some vulnerability to an appeal because of that language.
So look, I'll stop after this comment and let other people talk, but the words in any other case is important here, obviously.
Yeah, really important.
But there are two ways to read that, I think. One is the way you've read it, and the other is to say that in any other case refers to internally to section 3.5.5, and it's saying, look, there are three cases mentioned above, number 1, number 2, number 3, and they all have to do with the question of, does the building commissioner have the power to say, this is not a problem because of 1, 2, and 3. There are other possible cases of not increasing the non-conforming nature of the structure other than 1, 2, and 3. And I think a very strong reading of this is that's what any other case refers to. It's referring internally to 3.5.5. It's not throwing out the rest of the bylaw. It's just saying in 3.5.5, there could be other cases. And in those cases, the Board of Appeals would have its power.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the conversation. So are we, the first question is, what does it mean when you said provide more benefits to single and two-family houses in your conversation, Jay? And are we looking to increase or decrease the, the protections that are currently written into the zoning law? I guess those are my questions.
So clearly 355 is intended to benefit single-family homeowners, as well as to provide some administrative guidance for the building.
What does it mean benefit them? What benefits?
So if 355 didn't exist under the case law as it existed in 2012, not after that, but if 355 didn't exist at all, and we just reverted to the statute and the case law under the statutes, then any increase in a single or two-family structure would require special permit, any increase, provided that a building commissioner, following the guidance in some of those cases, could say, okay, this is such a small change, they're just covering the walkway, or, you know, adding a dormer, I'm gonna let that go. But there is no other guidance in those cases before a few examples. 355, looking at, again, through the lens of the case law as it existed as of the Gale case and prior to the Chatham case. Essentially, 355 creates three categories that gives the building inspector the authority to let a homeowner with prospective expansion go by without having to apply for a special permit. And they're all three of them are pretty generous. And so it provides some additional benefits to that. Now, following the Chatham case, if one were to interpret this as saying, well, we never want anyone, a single family homeowner, to apply for a variance, the most we would ever require is a special permit. Now, that really provides a substantial amount of benefits. I will point out, however, that your process for requiring special permits for expansions of a single and two family house is pretty rigorous. There's like multi-party reviews by all these other entities. So it's not without its trials and tribulations, but it's still easier than a variance. I don't have a policy position on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's been suggested to me that, hey, this is where we've been, that we haven't required, you know, for at least since 2013, the record is essentially treating this as in any other case. So even if you didn't qualify under 1, 2, and 3, the most you could ever be required to obtain is a special permit, and you would not be subject to a variance requirement. I don't have a problem with that. That's a policy question for the boards and ultimately for town meeting as to whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea to support homeowners' rights to or at least the opportunity to get by with something less than a variance. You could still say no on a special permit, but in a variance situation, if you said yes and the neighbor appealed it, the neighbor would almost always win. So maybe this was kind of a nod over the years to provide that additional kind of layer of protection for Joe homeowner who, you know, has a change and you don't want to run them through the ringer of the variance process. But
so it sounds like it's a balancing situation between the homeowners and the community.
It could be. Now, look, in Winchester, there's a substantial amount, and I think Dave already alluded to this, a substantial amount of homes are pre-existing non-conforming. And are you going to require every single one that might have a new non-conformity to go through a variance? That's a policy question. Some towns would say, heck yeah, you know, we're going to make it really rigorous. And some towns might say, you know what, we trust that the zoning board's going to make good decisions on these special permits and deny the ones where someone is trying to do something ridiculous and allow the ones that are common sense, even if there is a new nonconformity. And again, that's a policy question for you all. My only concern in reading this when it was brought to my attention was that given the passage of time in the case law after 2012, there could be varying interpretations. And I would hate to see a situation where that interpretation changed from, board to board based upon who's comprising that board at any given particular time.
Sally, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I just have questions. And I've listened, and I actually am probably more confused now about section 3.5 than I was before. But I think I kind of have a grip on what it means, except for the third paragraph of 355. And considering that those three paragraphs constitute the three instances in which change to a non-conforming single or duplex structure would not deem to increase the non-conforming. I kind of would like to understand what the third instance means. I understand that in instance 1 and 2, the structure is complying with all setbacks. And in number 3, the structure is encroaching upon one of the more yards or setbacks. So my question is, what do the next 2 phrases in that sentence mean? If one of you wants to read it and dissect it, because I've tried.
So
Thank
I
you.
can say,
That's my first of 3 questions.
I can say this very quickly. This third paragraph here, this is talking about a structure that already this is saying the structure already encroaches on one or more of the setbacks. But then there's going to be a change where that encroachment will go away, and that all of the changes now will be compliant with current setbacks, building coverage, and building height. So it's basically turning a non-conforming structure into a conforming structure.
Oh, I'll say where the alteration will comply with all current blah, blah, blah. And then
it could still be non-complying with respect to lot area.
Yeah, no, just the structure, right? Just the structure, not just
but the setbacks, they're reverting.
It's where the alteration will also comply with all of the said current requirements.
So for instance, let's say you have a house which is too close to the front of the lot, so it's not in compliance there, and they want to push the back of the house out, and they've got a 1,000-foot set, lot behind them. They could push it out as far as they want, essentially. That would be a conforming alteration, so it would be okay. That's my interpretation.
Well, okay. So alteration to a structure which encroaches upon one or more required yard or setback areas, where the alteration will comply with all current setback, yard, building coverage, and building heights. Comma, where the alteration will also comply with all of said current requirements. First of all, for clarity, I would have put the word "and" in front of the last "where," such that it would read where the alteration will comply with all of the current requirements, and where the alteration will comply with all of said current requirements. So again, my question would be, isn't the third phrase a duplication of the second phrase? Even when I add the word "and," it doesn't seem to make sense. No, Robert,
the first one the second one just relates to frontage.
Right. No, I'm saying second one.
You're saying that there's a redundancy. There's a redundancy in number 3.
It's like a tautology.
Okay, so that's.
I don't get it.
So one of the.
So anyway, I don't want to take a lot of time on this. It's obviously makes sense to other people. We can loop back outside of a meeting and someone can explain it to me. Let me tell you what my other 2 questions are. One is following up on something that you said, Jay, which is that variances are much more difficult to do than special permits. And so I just wanted a little tutoring on why that is so. And then my other question is that if this property is in a district where the special permit granting authority is another entity than the Board of Appeals, does that special permit granting authority role get inserted in those districts?
So let me no. So I'm not aware of a town that has ever shifted any responsibility for pre-existing non-conforming stuff from Board of Appeals to someone else. It's almost always the Board of Appeals. So that answers that question.
That's a relief to me. So thank you. And then about the variance.
Okay, so variance is the standard, and I don't know what they had in their head when they drafted Chapter 48, Section 10, but it's an impossible standard to meet. There are some cases that have upheld the grant of variances upon a challenge, but they are very few and far between. You have to show that your property is somehow unique in some way as compared to the other properties around it with respect to one of 3 criteria: that shape, topography, or soil conditions. Now that can be ostensibly possible if you can show that it's truly unique in that particular district. But you're going to have to also demonstrate that you are suffering some kind of hardship directly flowing from that uniqueness. And per the cases, you almost invariably have to show that it's not a self-imposed hardship, that when coming into the property, that you didn't have foreknowledge of the deficits of that property. And the cases on that are somewhat mixed, but the standard is very difficult to meet if you apply it literally. And there are very few cases on the record since 1975-ish, when it kind of came into its modern parlance, that have successfully defended the grant of a variance. Now, zoning boards do grant variances. Sometimes zoning boards have a history of never granting them, but some boards just grant them on basic fairness and say, okay, you guys have to defend it if someone appeals it, and very difficult. The special permit, on the other hand, is much more kind of esoteric in nature, where a planning board or a zoning board can make a reasoned decision that there's no detriment to the neighborhood, and kind of it fits in with the character and it's well designed, and that's a discretionary function. And the cases suggest that if there's any reasonableness to that, any reasonableness at all to that decision, that it's going to be upheld. So a zoning board that grants a special permit, as long as it was a reasonable, even if reasonable minds could differ, as long as there's any reasonableness to it, that's going to be upheld. Where the zoning board, even for all the kind of good intentions, grants a variance, that variance is vulnerable, even if they decide to grant it. So it's really difficult. And anyone who works in and around construction of houses or development of houses really will try and avoid a variance, because there are zero guarantees there.
That's a very helpful clarification. Thank you.
If I could try to, Sally, in your second question, not your last question, were you trying to draw a distinction between the ZBA and the planning board as special permit granting authorities?
Yes, well, that was it. And then I realized, well, it wouldn't matter if it's any other. My question is, I mean, the planning board is, as far as I know, in Winchester, the only other special permit granting authority. And we only do that in the Center Business District. And there aren't a lot, there may be in the Center Business District itself, no residential, single family or single or duplex residential structures. But it occurred to me that if there were.
There are.
Okay, well, that would make sense to me. I just couldn't think of any.
Vine Street.
On Main Street.
Vine Street.
Oh, Vine Street in the CBD?
Yeah.
Okay, let's say there were, and let's say that one of those came for a, came for us for something that was a non-conforming. It was a request to do something to a non-conforming single or duplex residential structure. The whole analysis would come before the planning board in that instance. That's my question. And the reason
it would.
Yeah, okay. That was why I was asking the question, because I thought it's really complex, and I'm not sure I would know what to do.
And I think this highlights a really important thing, is that when faced with the same set of facts, both the ZBA and the planning board should hopefully come to the same conclusions. And so what I'm hearing in discussing this section is I have two questions. Is the language clear so that both boards can understand it the same way?
No.
And that's what I'm understanding. And is the language consistent with current case law? And Jay, that's definitely your purview, is do we have to change this? So I mean, obviously I think we have to change it to make it clearer, because we have.
Is it necessarily true that the both boards would come to the same decision? That is to say, is the decision entirely law-based decision? I think I might be, or is it one where there's an interpretation that might be a legitimate interpretation that may differ?
Right.
I would say in that case, Nick, if we're in an area, if we both understand the law the same way, but we are interpreting the subjective parts differently in terms of, say, whether it affects a neighborhood or not, then I agree. But it seems there are some fundamental differences about the understanding of the written law,
Right.
which I think is, and that's where I'm getting at is
Yeah.
And so that's my concern.
One of Jay's points, which is probably the most important that's been made, is you don't want one board, let's take it's the Board of Appeals, to make a decision when the members are Miss A, B, and C, and 18 months later, on the same facts, now with 3 different board members, they make a different decision because they interpret the bylaw differently. You don't want that to happen. And if we could just jump to the chase here, these provisions are troublesome because they leave the town in a situation where there's uncertainty about who needs to apply for what and what standards and when and how they're going to be applied to those applications. And I happen to interpret this personally different probably than Jay does, and that's not a good situation. And so I think this needs work, and as Jay has said many times, and I'll underline this, there are wording issues and there are policy issues. And here we are confronted by a considerably significant policy issue, which is, does this mean, or does the town want to constrain the applications significantly, or does it not? And my view is that the way it's written, I mean, I have one interpretation, Jay who has much more knowledge than I do, has a different one. This needs to be worked on. That's all I gotta say.
I'm sorry, David. I don't think that I have as much, that I see as much ambiguity or requirement for personal judgment as you were describing. To me, it actually is clear, except for that 3rd paragraph in 355. Can you, this is a funny thing to say, can you be clearer about what's not clear?
Well, the primary thing to me is whether the later parts of the bylaw and the case law essentially gut the sentence about variances, which to me is pretty clear. It's written pretty clearly, and I think says lots of people need variances who probably weren't required to get them in the past. That's how I read it.
But in our town, what's happening is either 1, 2, or 3, and they've gone along and said no variance is needed. In fact, no variance or special permit is needed. But in any other case, then 1, 2, and 3, a special permit is needed. So it takes variance out of the picture.
Well,
is that what you're saying?
Jay's view is that a pretty good interpretation of the law is, yeah, that takes it out. And I don't know. I'm just reading the thing, and I have a problem with that. So, Jay, I think we should ask Jay, do you think it makes sense to try to work on this some more, both from a policy and wording point of view, or should we just press on the way we have been?
Well, look, I could defend or try to defend either interpretation of the bylaw, either where no variance would ever be required primarily because in any other case language, or an interpretation that supported, doesn't mention anything about new nonconformities, and given the Chatham case, variances are going to be required for new nonconformities. I think both are somewhat, are both reasonable interpretations generally, but I'm a little uneasy that where there's room for different interpretations. And I think in that the planning board is principally charged with the development of, or the review of zoning bylaws that are presented to town meeting, and whereas the zoning board is primarily charged with the implementation of that bylaws that applies to single and two-family houses and other changes, then the fact that there may be differing interpretations or any ambiguity or uncertainty as to which of those two interpretations applies, to me is a good reason to kind of shore it up a little bit. And again, I kind of go back and forth here. I keep landing on the in any other case language and trying to give that some meaning and effect. It's pretty all-consuming language, even if it predates the case law that may have impacted the thinking around it. So you don't have to change it, but my guess is if you don't change it, the zoning board, what I'm hearing, may interpret it in a way that many others don't think is the way that they see it. So I think we're all together. Planning board has opportunity at either this fall's town meeting or the next spring's town meeting, perhaps to give it some thought. My recommendation would be that you may wish to lock it in either direction based upon what your vision for the permitting regime for single and two-family homeowners is, because I'm not thrilled. Let's put it this way, if I have to defend an interpretation in court, I want to come back to the board that I'm defending and say, I've got this one 99%. Right now, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I think you get some deference. It's a 75% proposition. That's not, maybe a little better. That's not where I'd love to be. I'd love to be at 100%. And I just don't think you're there with the language, because I'm hearing just on this call different interpretations of the same words.
Dorothy?
So it sounds like you guys need to work on this.
Nick,
that would make sense.
Nick, hold on a sec. Dorothy, you've got the floor.
Hi, thank you, David. So hi, Jay. My name is Dorothy Simboli. I've been on the board as an alternate since 2016. So I've seen a lot of these cases, and I've seen how the board has operated throughout the years. Generally, there hasn't been any sort of confusion amongst the board members to date about the interpretation of the zoning bylaws. When there is a case where we need some additional assistance because of the details or the complications involved, then we've brought in town council, or town council has stepped up and has done memorandums to us to give us guidance on how it should be interpreted. Because this board, in my opinion, is not a policy creating board. We are simply applying what the law is to the facts. And so we've relied on town council to say, this is what your law means, and this is how it would be applied to the facts. So until town meeting decides that they want to change the policy with regard to these pre-existing non-conforming structures, I think it might be helpful for you to do like a memo to both the planning board and the Board of Appeals, explaining how you interpret it, or giving us guidance on how we should be interpreting these laws. And then maybe even suggesting if it, to town council, or not to town council, but to town meeting, or whoever would be bringing it to town meeting. If you want to handle it differently, if you want a policy change, then this is the language you'd recommend. But I don't think it's helpful to sort of, I guess, have conflicting interpretations within this board at this time, given the consistency in how we've done things and the decisions we've made to date. That's just,
so
I think that might be helpful.
And that's all super thoughtful. So if someone asked me today to write a memo on what the interpretation is, variance or no variance, I couldn't say for certain which is the correct. I think that the memo would say, pick one or the other, and both could be given reasonable effect. I'm also hearing, however, that there may have been a historical means of interpreting this, but that may be evolving a little bit based upon recognition of what some of the later cases say. So I can't really say for certain. I have drafted a proposed amendment to 355 by adding 10 words that would tilt it toward or tilt it away from variances, because it appears that there is some demonstrable history of interpreting it that way. If the planning board or anyone else who wanted to present a bylaw on this wanted to see a version of it tilting the other way, where new nonconformities would require a variance, I could draft that too. I just, I like to give certain advice. And if you asked me to do a memo right now, Dorothy, it would be kind of a pick 'em kind of thing. I can't say definitively which is the correct interpretation. It's really dependent on local preference, and each interpretation comes with some risk that there's a contrary argument that with certain judges may be prevailing.
It might be helpful to disentangle the two activities. One is to clarify the language with no tilting. And then once we have a clear language that would kind of eliminate the interpretation problem, we can then address whether we want to move one way or the other, possibly.
And any clarification is going to tilt it either towards the variance regime or away from the variance regime. So,
okay.
I can't keep it stuck in the middle unless if someone wanted me to create, if the marching orders were keep 1, 2, and 3, but otherwise mimic the current case law, then what I would do is draft a change that supports the notion that variances would be required for new nonconformities. However, as I noted previously, a town is free to make provide more rights to property owners and essentially expunge the requirement to ever get a variance if you are changing pre-existing non-conforming single or two-family house. So that's why, I think it really comes down to making a policy decision. And you can choose to do nothing. What I'm seeing in terms of the different interpretations is that it's probably going to come to a head at some point where someone's going to want to do something, because there on this call there appears to be a couple of different takes on this already. So, which isn't a bad thing. It's just different strokes.
I have two questions for you. You said
can I just,
you said that a town can make it less restrictive. Can a town by its language make it more restrictive? That's my first question. And then number two, earlier you had said that there was language in, I think, 355 that you said was unenforceable based on current case law.
354.
354 is unenforceable.
As it applies, and only if 354 was the only thing you had that applied to single or two-family houses. So that was a hypothetical that if 355 didn't exist, part of 354 would be unenforceable.
And why
355 does exist.
Can you explain why 354 would be unenforceable?
So it says, hold on a sec. It says the reconstruction, extension, or structural change of a non-conforming structure in such a way as to increase an existing non-conformity, that's one, or create a new non-conformity shall require a grant of a variance. The former, the increase in existing non-conformity, would never require a variance in the instance of a single or two-family house. In any other kind of structure, commercial structure, anything that's not a single or two-family house, then that's an accurate statement, potentially. But for a single or two-family house, that's an inaccurate statement. But again, you have 355, which is narrower and specific. So That was really just a for instance.
So in other words, we could not, as a town, make that provision of 354 enforceable. We cannot make that more restrictive on a single family or two family homeowner.
Right. If 355 didn't exist, 354 wouldn't be that one phrase, that highlighted phrase right there that Brian is highlighting, would not be enforceable as to single or two family houses.
And that's based on what case law?
Again, I think that, I mean, it's based on the statute, but it's also kind of more spelled out in the Bransford, the Bjorkland, and the Gale versus Gloucester case. So Bjorkland is a Norwell case, Bransford's an Edgartown case, Gale versus Gloucester, obviously. So, so in those cases.
Would the language you identified in 3.5.4 be enforceable, however, because there is 3.5.5?
I'm sorry, what was the question, David? I missed the last part of your question.
Well, you said that part of 3.5.4 would not be enforceable if you did not have.
No, it wouldn't be enforceable as to single or two family structures. It would be enforceable against other kinds of structures.
And 3.5.5 has nothing to do with that, right?
Well, 355 provides a whole set of rights that are unique to single or two family structures.
Yeah, okay.
So if I could interrupt here, I seem to have a little bit of a lag on my setup. We do have other things we have to talk about on the agenda, and we only have half an hour left or so. I want to just, the two things I'm coming out of this is that there's a policy decision that has to be made, and that's up to the planning board. And there are certainly concerns about the consistency of the language.
I'd like to have more conversation happen behind the scenes offline between, seems like, the knowledgeable attorneys in this matter and really advise further. I think I'm just touching the iceberg of understanding. Well, and so it would be helpful to have, Jay and perhaps David talk and kind of flesh things out.
We would, I guess it would be difficult to do that when not violate open meeting law. So
okay,
we'll have to come up a way of dealing with that. But I think we do have to move on because we do have two other items on our agenda to talk about. And I don't want to give them short shrift because one of them's a big one. And that has to do with subdivision versus special permit for grading, if I'm correct. So Brian, you want to pop up our agenda? I've already forgotten what the other two were.
Sure. Hold on, let me get it up.
Oh, this is minor site plan review and then timing of site plan review and definitive subdivision.
Yeah, we were going to kind of have a brainstorming session on what a potential minor site plan review would be, which would, we'd kick this around a little bit of essentially allowing applicants to apply with less information than currently required for a site plan review. I had met with assistant engineer Brian Manter, and we kind of talked about how this goes about through a normal building permit, regardless of if it requires regardless if it requires a special permit or site plan review or not in terms of what they would need. We took the idea of, let's say that this, a potential project is more than 500 square feet of new impervious surface. So that would require infiltration. So at any point, no matter what, the applicant would still have to supply drainage calculations. And we were trying to go back and forth to see, well, what would we only, for a potential minor site plan review, what would we not require? And we couldn't, and Brian, you can chime in here, we couldn't really come up with anything that was substantial that would actually lessen the burden or lessen the amount of money, for instance. Really the real burden, quote, is the process, meaning the time, the 3 to whatever months it takes to go through the process. Whether they have minor site plan review or major site plan review, we couldn't come up with anything that would make an applicant require less, but still be less painful. So that's kind of where, this is more of a brainstorming session of ZBA. Do you think of if there's anything like what seems to be the biggest holdup for applicants outside of the drainage?
Brian, do you want to pop up that part of the zoning bylaw where this comes up? So there's an escape hatch for avoiding site plan review if the size of your project is below a certain amount. And we had an applicant, and I know you've seen this same person, who came before us and said, I essentially have to do everything needed for a full site plan review to be able to escape a site plan review. So what's the point? And so the planning board has been discussing a lot. What exactly can we do to provide relief? Because you don't want to have to force someone to go through a site plan review if it's not really worth it. So what do we do in order to provide some relief? For instance, if you've got a 3,500 square foot house and you're adding 10 square feet above that, do you still need to go through site plan review? We don't want them to. So we tried to come up with ideas on what, and Richard Leaf joined us in our conversations. And so that's sort of what we're coming before bringing it up to everyone is, what can we do to provide some relief to people so they don't have to go through the whole enchilada?
Right. This waiver is, as it sits right now, is not really a waiver. They have to go through the whole process. They have to provide whatever it is they want to provide. People could be like, well, why didn't you supply this information? And they're like, because I'm asking for a waiver. But the zoning board, it's hard for them to waive the site plan or approval. Here it is, provided that it finds that the impact of the proposal on the neighbor would not be significant. But maybe they don't have enough information to determine that. So the problem is that this is not a waiver. This doesn't really do anything for an applicant. And the question was, what should we do with this? The directive after a planning board brainstorming session was, let's not get rid of this yet. We don't want to get rid of it, meaning like that was one option, was to get rid of it for this fall town meeting and just don't allow it at all, which is still potentially on the table. The other option, which is that we're trying to pursue, is that maybe there's some other way that we don't have a waiver, but maybe it's a site plan review light or a minor site plan review to help out with these very small projects that have like virtually no impact. So that's kind of the, that's the background here, is that we're trying to figure out, one, what to do with this. At the very least, my opinion is to get rid of this because it's not working the way that anyone intended. It's basically a waiver, but you still have to wait the 3 months. It's still a decision by the ZBA. It can still be appealed. Like, it's not really doing much.
Brian, what I remember is that we can.
Sally wants, Dorothy had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dorothy.
So I would just make one comment on this. I mean, I do think that I can understand, that you think it's not doing much because it's get rid of it altogether. Obviously, you have to look at the topography, you have to look at the drainage. I mean, 500 square feet on a really super small lot is going to have some kind of impact. But when it gets to us, historically, it's kind of like they don't have to have a lawyer at the meeting. They don't have to have their architect at the meeting. They don't have to sit there and wait at the meeting. I mean, it's just like it gets before us. It's boom, it's done. It's like we're waiving it. So it does save them some time. It saves them from needing to come back in front of us again, asking for a continuation. I mean, it does save a significant portion of time, for us to be able to give them a waiver. That's just all I would say. But I don't think, I mean, you can tell me, what you think in terms of like whether or not you could waive it at an earlier phase. I don't know. That's not my place.
Yeah, one idea was to, waive it at the building department level, and that was not something that we wanted to pursue. This was more not something that the planning board felt. It was more of applicants approached us saying that I still got to do all this stuff. It's not help, it's not, it's them saying that this is not a waiver.
You know what, but it does help them out immensely. I mean, because you can look at the applicants that come before us. Many of them have continued, their cases are continued for months on end. I mean, it does. It could potentially save them 3 months. So, you know, it's quick and easy when by the time it gets to us, it's quick and easy. That's all I'm saying is it does save them something.
Sally.
Brian, I'm having trouble with what you said for the following reason. I guess I'm just not understanding. Let's imagine, because I think this is what should be done. I think 500 square feet is too big. You can put a pretty big addition on a house on one floor at 500 square feet. So just bear with me. Let's suppose it said 250 square feet. And in that mode, let's assume that the engineering department says, well, it's not, that isn't it, you know, we don't have jurisdiction over, we're not interested in that. It's not big enough. So that's one. And then why wouldn't it be useful? Because I think it would be useful to not call it a waiver, but do what you said, call it, you know, site plan light. And here's where I'm going. Allow them to present a less comprehensive set of drawings, for example, and a less comprehensive, and maybe reduce the number of other boards that are going to look at this thing. I mean, there's a whole list of parties who supposed to look at these things, and we could winnow it down to the 3 key ones. I'm thinking planning board, historical, and design review, and not the others. And the third thing that I think is really pretty useful is go look at the site plan review standards. There are like 11 of them, and many of them, they just don't matter. They don't apply. And you basically say to the applicant, you don't need to answer this. You don't need to justify these grounds. So on 3 bases, you would turn it into light. And why wouldn't that work?
Totally would work.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. We're trying to come up with an idea for a minor site plan review.
Sally, you had your hand up. You're muted.
Unmute, lower hand. Thank you. I did have my hand up. My confusion was not so much, well, to recap what we talked about in the planning board, the last time we did a deep dive on this, we said we would go home and do our homework and we would come back and discuss this. And we would come up with each of us, our own assessment of what seems like anything that you could take out of the onerous submission requirements. And I think that we did discuss this, or maybe I only had this in my mind, but it was that it would be particularly helpful for smaller proposed projects to not have to do all the drainage research. Because drainage, the engineering associated with that can be very expensive. So that would be the only thing that we had talked about taking out of the submission requirements. David's proposing that we take out additional review by other boards, and that's something we can certainly talk about. Although, again, the question would be how onerous is that to the owner? But that was my only point, was this thing that what I remembered last was that we're only talking about taking drainage analyses out of the minor site plan review condition. I mean, we still haven't defined what would trigger minor as opposed to regular. So that's
we can't. Sorry, go for it, Dia.
Yes. Sorry, I have a lot of lag on my connection, so I apologize for interrupting people. So I want to, in response to what Sally just said, so what was kind of surprising to us is that Richard Leaf, who came on and said he liked the idea that we would actually be having all of these other boards review it, because he thought it led to, and I hope I'm paraphrasing you correctly, Richard. And so as a person on the other side of the table from us, that was really interesting to hear that he thought it was valuable. The other thing I want to, in terms of what Sally was saying about drainage calculation or drainage review, is that we know that eventually all projects have to meet the requirements from engineering on drainage. So whether it gets before, so that's always a condition of the project, is that it does have to meet whatever engineering says they have to meet. So relieving them of this upfront requirement doesn't absolve them of having to do it eventually. So that's, I think, the big thing. And then Brian, and in response to the other thing we talked about, is that Brian Zakelli and Brian Manter, we asked them to go away and tell us, look at everything that has to be done right now in site plan review. Is there something you can get rid of that would make it easier? And I think the result from their analysis was not really. So
in terms of the requirements, yeah, I mean, because basically we're already there. If it's 499 square feet, they don't have to do drainage.
But even then, drainage only has to, I mean, it's a condition at the end. They just have to meet the specs regardless. So Dorothy, your hand was up, I think.
Yeah. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to comment on the drainage piece, but you covered it already, so it's fine.
Okay. I mean, I think, Richard, are you waving your hand? Please, go ahead.
Thank you. By the way, I think it's great that both groups are meeting tonight. I'm thrilled that you're all trying to get on the same page with the prior conversation. In terms of the site plan review, from my point, so I'm Richard Leaf, I'm an architect. Leaf Design Associates, have lived in town for over 30 years, have been practicing primarily doing single family additions and renovations for about 25 years now. So that's my background for those of you that don't know me. So from my point of view, the most onerous thing for our homeowner clients are the aspects where we have to go out and hire other design professionals. The site plan and drainage is worse than any of you, I think, realize, because not only is it the cost, it's a number of costs. Topography needs to be included on a plot plan where otherwise it might not be. You have to pay a drainage engineer, and they actually have to come on site and dig test pits. So I can't emphasize how much I think it's onerous for a client to be having to provide the drainage design before they know whether they're going to get approved or not. Absolutely, if it's approved and it's required by the engineering department, I'm all for that. But so the only other part that I would add to that is any of the aspects of like landscape design, anything where the homeowner has to go out and hire another professional, that starts to cost big money. Going for me or for them to attend the Historic Commission or the Design Review Committee, it's just another hour or two, and it's really small money. And like I said earlier at one of the other planning board meetings, I think the input of all four boards is wonderful. I think everything that the ZBA has to say is great. I think everything Historic has to say is great. I think the people on the Design Review Committee are great. I think everybody's contributing to this. So I continue to think it's not at all onerous for a homeowner to have to go through the three advisory groups and then end up at the ZBA. I have no problems with that. It's the parts of what I would call the site plan review, the mini site plan review, which I first experienced in Sudbury, of the minor site plan review. Anything that you can do to avoid other professionals until those other professionals are truly needed for building permit, I think is the way to really help the homeowner out. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a timing issue that we're going to have the same requirements, but adjust the timing so that those expenses do not have to be incurred if there's a chance that the project will ultimately be denied.
And it's big, and Nick, it's big money. I mean, it could be, it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 or $6,000 for somebody to do the additional surveying topo work, and then have an engineer do the drainage plan and do the O&M manual, and also and it's also pretty invasive for somebody to have a construction equipment on their lot, like digging holes for an addition that may or may not actually get approved. I mean, that's a pretty bad one for a homeowner. That's a really hard one for me to have to explain. I mean, both the reality of it and the money part of it. So, but in terms of the drainage, once were approved, I'm all for. Absolutely. I don't want to spill water on anybody else's property any more than any of you do. I mean, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks. I Ching has her hand up. You're on mute. Okay.
I know, I was waiting for Diab to.
No, I know, he was on mute.
I appreciate those comments from Richard, but I would counter those with the fact that it is onerous to meet so many review committees and boards. I think that, like David said, we could reduce some of that time, and it is half an hour, it's 10 minutes or whatever it is to go in front of these boards, but they do meet on different times, and you have to, circumvent, you have to obey open meeting laws, and they sort of are, timed at different times. So you're in front of three boards, it's timed so that, there is months, it could be 2 to 3 months of waiting before you come in front of the ZBA. And I don't deny that these boards have a lot to contribute, but for, say, a 250 square foot addition to a 5,000 square foot house, to come before these boards, you do pay people like Richard time to go in front of it, and that's not insignificant. And you are waiting, and as time passes and costs increase, I would argue that wait time is onerous, and it could somehow be reduced.
Those meetings are happening in the 2 to 3 weeks before the ZBA meets. It's not in any way adding to the length of time. I mean,
it's probably an important conversation that occurs.
I mean, I guess I'm just telling you from my perspective. There are people on the historic commission like John Clemson, who I really and there's Jamie Duvall, there's other architects, there's other designers. I value their input and their questions, and I think there's a lot of builders and developers in town who are maybe just trying to get their projects approved in the quickest way possible, and they're not necessarily interested in that feedback. But I think I really don't see it as a time delay. The three advisory groups that meet are typically meeting in the 2 or 3 weeks before the ZBA. It's usually in this literally within a month. It's all happening. I'm just telling you from my point of view, I don't perceive it adding at all to the time issue.
I see your presence in front of these boards is very helpful, but I think for some small homeowners or people who don't have experience going before these boards, it is very intimidating. It's difficult. It would reduce a lot of pressure should they just go before, say, Al Lyle or whoever it is, instead of going through all.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting that if you look at the list, there are 7 or 8 different parties.
Yes, no, I'm not saying that we're going to meet all of those. I'm just saying if you went at it, the number of people that these people have to go before.
If you went at it down to historical design review and planning, that would be useful. But I just have one thought. Richard is suggesting, how about rearranging the order so that the site plan review by the Board of Appeals is guaranteed to occur before certain other things have to be done. And then in these instances, in these small project instances, and then you achieve what he's asking for, and you can still have the other bodies give their comments, which I think most people think, at least for some of those bodies, are useful.
Okay. Unfortunately,
Dorothy.
Yeah, I see Dorothy, your hand's up. I just want to, we're technically, our joint meeting is technically over, and because the planning board does have to talk about fall town meeting articles. So we have one big thing that we didn't discuss, which is subdivision, definitive subdivisions and site plan reviews, and how those two, we ran into this problem with Abbey Road, where there was a situation we never want to have happen again, where there was site plan review possibly because of changes in the grade, but that was part of the subdivision because they were putting in drainage. So that's a big issue that we have to talk about, is the timing, whether those, how we stage those. But Dorothy, let me get your last thought on this and on the minor subdivision, minor site plan review.
Oh, I just had a question for Richard. Well, I have one comment and then I have a question for Richard. So my comment is, have there been any cases that, you know, anyone is aware of that are less than 500 square feet that have come before the ZBA that we haven't approved? And actually, I have one more comment on David's thing. David, I don't think we can, as a board, if we start conditioning our decisions on the approval of other boards, that's going to create like a whole change in terms of protocol. It really has to be us last. So my question for Richard is, are you suggesting for maybe something that's less than 500 square feet? You're saying, you know, people don't want to do all of this investment in doing drainage plans without knowing whether ZBA is going to approve it at the end of the day. Are you suggesting that maybe that waiver piece just comes out, or it's just clarified if it's less than 500 square feet, you still have to do drainage, you still have to get in front of these other boards, but you don't actually need ZBA approval? What do you envision ideally?
Well, first of all, I think David made a comment earlier that I kind of agree with. I'm not sure that 500 square feet is even the right number. I know that's the number that the engineering department is using as its trigger. And I think Brian Manter's on this call. So the engineering department is using 500 square feet as the trigger for, and it's not a 500 square foot addition. It's a 500 square foot net increase to impervious surface. So that's a really big difference. There's a lot of subtlety to that. And I probably don't have the time. I shouldn't take up everybody's time like that, but I think David Fagenbaum is right to say that 500 feet, that everybody should think about whether 500 feet is the right number or not. Because in theory, somebody could add a 20 by 24 garage, 20 foot by 24 garage, that would be 480. And that would fall, you know, so I'm not sure if 500 is the right number or not. But I think, I'm not even sure I know how to answer your question, but the thing that I'm really trying to get at is that drainage, and I think everybody's here, I feel like I'm saying this over and over again, but the drainage piece, both within site plan review, and I know we're not talking about this, but even just as the projects get to the ZBA in general, that is a really onerous thing for homeowners to have to do when they're not sure if their project is going to get approved or not. So I think I'm thinking about it more systematically or holistically, not just site plan review, but just in general. I wish the timing got switched around so that the homeowner knew that fundamentally the structure was approved. Now we have to spend the 5,000 or the 6,000 or whatever it is to get the engineering plan. I also want to mention, and I think all of this discussion you were having earlier, I'm very nervous. I don't even know how to advise clients, but I will tell you that up till a few years ago, my understanding of site plan review was that it was quote unquote review, that the ZBA actually ultimately had to approve a project, that they weren't in a, and I'm not saying I'm right about this, I'm just saying this is the way I used to perceive site plan review, was that it was a review where they could comment on landscaping, on exterior lighting, on drainage, on materials, on, you know, whatever, all the things that would fall under the guise of quote unquote site plan review. Now, these days, where everything is being looked at and the language is being analyzed more carefully, I'm not even sure if what I just said is true or not. But anyway, to answer your question, I'm just urging you all to rethink the timing of when drainage is required, because it's just horrible for me to try to explain to a homeowner that they have to spend all of this money when their project either site plan review or their special permit or their variance may not be approved. Like it just doesn't make sense, you know. And so that's I probably didn't answer your question, but anyway.
And Richard, would you, I know you lumped the landscape plans in with the same category as being onerous and a lot to do for a small project, and couldn't they just submit them after the zoning board of appeals?
Well, there's so the landscaping is a little different because in a sense, so first of all, there's an engineering department in town, like with Brian and Beth, you know, but there's no landscaping department. So in some ways, I think the planning board and the ZBA and the other groups should kind of like to see a landscape design.
Oh, I think so too.
If that's really, you know, certainly like in things in the CBD that you've been, you know, the big, you know.
No, I'm just saying town-wide. I don't even, I mean, if somebody puts a 250-foot addition on there.
You shouldn't have to.
You're saying not to have to do a landscape plan.
I'm saying for minor site plan review, I think it's onerous.
Would it be something like the drainage issue where you would want to see it after the fact, after the zoning board of appeals ruling?
Well, there's nobody I guess what I'm saying, there's no department in town that would really be.
Well, that's what design review is serving as right now. It's very helpful to hear their insights.
Right, but the landscape would happen. I'm not sure where the DRC would be in the timing of the.
I know that's not.
Yeah.
So I am saying that yes, for a smaller project, I truthfully, if I was doing a project and landscaping was I think critical to the design, or maybe another way, or critical to convincing people to approve the design, I would probably urge my client to hire a good landscape designer anyway, if I felt it was like needed for the project. But if it's just doing a checklist, you know, on the things that have to be submitted, but there's no real landscape design, you know, integral to the project because it's such a small addition, or it's just on a lawn and it's just some grass and now there'll be, you know, so yes, I'm suggesting that trying to eliminate other professionals, at least for my piece of the pie, is by far the biggest savings to the homeowners. And in terms of the other boards, I don't know what other boards you all are talking about.
Yeah.
To me, I go in front of the design review committee, the historical commission, the planning board, and the ZBA. And those are the four groups that I go to for any of our projects. And like I was saying earlier, they all happen depending on the month within a 2 to 3 week, or at most a 4-week sequence. So there's no delay. And I don't know what when somebody said earlier there were 7 groups. I don't know.
Conservation as needed.
Hold on.
Yeah, but that's not costing, that just happens. I mean, Elaine just does that and Brian just does his thing.
Yeah, can I butt in, please?
Yeah, and I'll be quiet.
Again, there's a lag, so we do have to cut this short, unfortunately. There are a number of boards that things get sent to, but you never hear from. So for instance, Disability Access gets a copy of things sometimes. I forget what the rules. So there are other boards, but we never hear from them usually. So unfortunately, we do have to stop short because planning board does have to get to other things. And I apologize. We probably should have put in 2 hours for our meeting this evening, but I'm sure you'd have all really been thrilled.
Sorry for talking so much, and thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm sorry, David.
Thank you for hosting us. I think this was useful, and I suggest we do it again.
I agree. I think we should probably do this quarterly rather than every 4 years or whatever it is. But yeah, this has been incredibly useful. So
very helpful.
I think we have a lot of ideas that the planning board will be looking at. And I think we're going to be coming right back to the ZBA and asking for your input on some stuff. So thank you all very much. And we now return everyone to the planning board's agenda. So, do you guys need to roll call yourself out of here? I don't think you officially.
Formally, I suppose we do, but
you didn't formally.
You didn't
formally take a vote to come in. So
the meeting of the Board of Appeals is adjourned.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Unless if you want to stick around and listen to us talk about zoning articles. Okay, so to jump right in, we have, so I sent the planning board a memo over the weekend. Let's start with the ADU bylaw. And this is kind of a mess, and it's a little bit of a mess because let me quickly go through for those in the public who haven't seen this memo. So the planning board set up a working group about a year ago, maybe a little 10 months ago, including members of the planning board, the Housing Partnership Board, Disability Access, Winchester Housing Authority. I think I got all of them.
Council on Aging.
Council on Aging, thank you. I don't know, Philip, I apologize to you, wherever you are. And the idea was to try to look at a zoning bylaw which would allow accessory dwelling units by right in Winchester. And over the last 8 months, the ADU working group has developed a framework which would target two populations, namely persons with disabilities and people, I guess we settled on over the age of 62 to meet their particular needs. And the ADU working group, which is an advisory group to the parent boards, had decided that we would present the plan was to present language to their parent boards with the aim of suggesting we bring a zoning bylaw to the spring of 2023, that town meeting. So earlier this summer, select board member Michael Betancourt came out with his own ADU bylaw that he wants to present at this fall's town meeting. So we had two groups of people seemingly not aware of each other's activities, and the ADU working group learned about this when it was publicly presented at a select board meeting. We started working with Michael Betancourt on the language, and the language the ADU working group feels is greatly improved and reflective of what the working groups, it reflects their concerns and where they want this to go. The remaining issue was the timing. So Michael Betancourt, it's still up till about last week or so, he was the primary sponsor as a elected official. We're elected officials in Winchester can submit an article to town meeting directly without going through getting a certain number of signatures or anything like that. And so he was going to use his prerogative as an elected official to submit this article to town meeting. He also wanted to have a number of other groups become co-sponsors because he wants us to pass. The ADU working group had a meeting about a week and a half ago in which all of the members who were present were on board with the idea that if something was going before a fall town meeting, we wanted to make sure that it passed. And so whether the timing was what the group was what the group wanted didn't really matter, because it was coming before a fall town meeting and the wording was essentially what the working group thought was appropriate, that it should recommend to all their boards that they sign on to this article. Subsequently, I had a discussion with Michael Betancourt. I think it was it last Thursday? I can't recall any longer. And the question came up as to, if we really wanted to get this to pass, who should be the primary sponsor? And it seemed to me that since this whole effort was essentially, the ADU working group was created at the behest of the planning board trying to move this forward, and that this is really in line with all of our work in terms of bringing more affordable housing and more housing choices. It goes in with the master plan, it goes into the housing production plan. These are both flagship treatises, I guess, whatever you want to call them, that we really base our work on, that it would make sense for the planning board to become the prime sponsor and usher it through town meeting. And so that is the question I'd like to pose to the board. And does the board wish to take on that role? And I'm going to stop talking and open it up to any and all discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Whoever that was.
That was Sally. It is Sally.
Okay.
And I think the reason that we talked about doing it in the spring and not the fall was the whole thing of wanting to get as many people to hear what we're talking about and to learn and understand what we're proposing, and for us to hear as many concerns as there might be out there in the community of stakeholders and residents and so on, and that we thought it would take a certain amount of time to go through the process of meeting with all of those people and getting all of their input and making sure that what we bring to town meeting has a really good chance of passing, because it reflects a lot of input from a lot of players. And I understand that the notion that Michael proposed to bring it to fall town meeting is based on it doesn't take that long and we should be able to pull it off. And so because it does make sense, if it's going to go to fall town meeting, for it to come from the planning board, then I think that if we decide that we want to put our name on it, then we have to figure out how to get as much input as possible from all of the community groups and other sort of opinion, fountains of opinion that are around town. And as long as we can address all their concerns or whatever, and not have it come into town meeting and blow up in our face, then I think it's fine. That's what I wanted to say.
Is there anyone else that could get it passed better than we can? I mean, that's kind of that's as best as I can put the question. I mean, I'm perfectly happy not to have ownership of it if we feel that there is another way that will get it passed even more surely than us, but I don't know who that might be. It sounds like we're the ones. And Brian.
Yeah, I would say the only thing that would be better, so one of the planning board's roles in all municipalities is to periodically update the zoning bylaw, whether through policy or for clarification. So that's definitely the planning board's wheelhouse. The only thing better, in my opinion, than the planning board going is getting everybody on board, like to have any zoning article sponsored by the most amount of boards and committees as you can get on that co-sponsorship. So you're talking about, if it doesn't matter, forget ADUs, just if you're talking about putting forward a zoning bylaw and you have the planning board, the select board, council on aging, housing partnership board, if you have 5 boards or committees that are sponsoring it, that would be the only thing better. And I think that's what Michael Betancourt was trying to do in his own way. But I think that's what he did want, is for everyone to just, come to an agreement and get along. And that is the best way to get it passed, is to have all of these groups. And that's what's happening right now, is that this draft bylaw has been sent to all these parent groups. The Council on Aging has already voted to co-sponsor whoever is going to be the primary sponsor. So they're already on board. The Housing Partnership Board is meeting, I want to say next week. And then I know there are comments from the Housing Authority, and then we don't have any comments yet from the Select Board because they haven't reviewed the draft in full at all.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say there's a technical reason, and then there's the political reason that Brian's talking about. I just want to say that it turns out that if you want to introduce a zoning bylaw, it has to come from either the planning board or the select board or as I said, one elected official, or a
10
resident.
10 registered voters.
You get 10 registered people, or a person who's owns property which would be affected by the bylaw. So as of now, the select board has not made a decision. They were originally, the idea from Michael Betancourt, I think, was to have the select board move forward on this. But there are certainly some public comments made by select board members that zoning is not the purview of the select board, it's the purview of the planning board, and why should they bring forward something which is really the planning board's? So one powerful reason for the planning board to take it on is that I think it would be very easy then for the select board to come in and co-sponsor it, because they would see, yes, it is a planning board purview and it's a planning board thing. So I'm going to step back now. That's just the technicalities, and go back to Brian with the political realities.
Yeah. So back to, so personally, and I put this in the memo, that the tenets of this bylaw, which basically, you know, is not by right for anybody in town. It would be by right on a single or a duplex lot, where either the primary unit or the accessory unit, there would have to be someone either over 62 or someone with a disability. The nuance of you know, wordsmithing, you know, that's going to take, that can take time, you know, through legal counsel and through a potential zoning hearing. But what we need to decide tonight, actually, if we want to actually put this on the not necessarily, we wouldn't be voting to put this on the warrant. We would just be voting to have a zoning hearing about this. And then there would be a subsequent vote after that to say, actually, yeah, we do want to move forward at this time. But we do, I think in its current form, with, like I said, the tenets of it, of allowing ADUs for those two populations makes sense. It's a heavy lift, I think, in general, just because this is an entirely new concept for Winchester. But I believe in it. It's in the housing production plan, and it's in the master plan that we both, that this board and the select board had a hand in both of those documents. So my recommendation is that, not necessarily a timing recommendation, it's that this is a good first phase of an ADU bylaw. That's kind of it's pretty hard for people to come out against seniors and people with disabilities, put it that way.
So in this first step, we're limiting the ADUs to just people over the age of 62. Is it first step?
No. So it's people over 62 and people with a disability, but they can live in either unit. So there's a life cycle to an ADU. Okay. So you could have someone, let's say, not to pick on widows and widowers, but let's say you have a widow or a widower, they don't need the primary house. So they would live in the accessory dwelling unit, and they would rent out the primary house to a family. That primary house would be to a family no matter what anyway. So it's not
and these two restrictions presumably make it more, I guess, passable.
That was the thought. Yes.
Mm-hmm. There was, we looked at neighboring communities, Arlington being our immediate neighbor, which went through a long drawn out process to bring this forward. Because we thought this was the simplest, yes. If you look around the state, the ones which pass are the ones which are limited to these. There is a lot of experience in other states, for instance, in California, where there was a statewide by right for these two populations. And it turned out that it was not so onerous, and it actually became by right for everyone. We're not proposing that here. We don't know. I mean, one of the things we hoped for was to have more conversations over the next 8 months, but in a sense, we don't have that opportunity. The language I'll use is, I think our hand has been forced here, and so I actually was a very strong proponent for waiting until spring so that we could have a robust community conversation. We know that in other communities where there hasn't been a robust conversation, that the odds of this passing are lower. They have been lower. So the other thing that is unique about this is that, and that's another technicality, nominally, if a article fails at town meeting, you have to wait 2 years before it can be brought back, unless it is brought back in a significantly changed, it has been significantly altered. Not the right language, but you get the gist.
No, hold on, Diep. So if the planning board does not need, the planning board can.
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. But in this case, because it is a zoning bylaw, the planning board can bring it back if we endorse it, which presumably if we're going to bring it back, we're going to endorse it. So there is an exception if the planning board brings it forward as a zoning bylaw. So it's not required the planning board does it the first time around, but it makes no sense to me that if it were to fail this fall because it was not supported by the planning board, that we would come back in the spring and have almost identical language and say, oh yeah, we want to get on board right now.
Right.
I hope I'm not confusing things more.
No, I don't think it's confusing.
And am I also hearing that there is a kind of a competition between this and Betancourt, or is this kind of one and the same?
This is, all parties have signed on to the language.
Okay.
This is Michael Betancourt. I spoke with him. He is willing to cede primary sponsorship to the planning board. He wants this to get across the goal line.
Right.
The question is, what's the best way to do that, given that there really is no choice and it's coming before us in the fall?
Right, right. And so because it's coming before us in the fall, one of our best vehicles for getting large amounts of substantive community input is the zoning hearing. Is that right, Brian?
I would say from my experience so far, the actual hearing is not where we get it. We're required to do it, okay? You can't put something before town meeting without having that zoning hearing, but most of the comments come after the hearing in the form of emails and correspondence from others, meaning residents. So like a lot of the time you get a lot of extremely thought-provoking questions that come out of the hearing, and then that kind of initiates residents and other boards and committees to say, hey, have you thought about this language? You know, this I think makes more sense. So it's born out of the hearing, but not actually at the hearing.
Right. So now my follow-on question to that is, or maybe it's just an observation, the work of the Communication Study Committee was initiated in large part because of a lack of opportunities for people to get information about what was going to be put in town meeting. And in the case of the Waterfield one, it was such a lack of information that it resulted in a very expensive reversal of a vote at town meeting. We would never want that to happen. So my point is, can we be very creative and assertive and revolutionary or whatever about getting as many people's input between now and the deadline for fall town meeting? And I'm just looking at this thing that I made, that the fall town meeting warrant closes in this month, like next week or something, and it's already on the warrant as a placeholder, so we can decide to pull it. We just have to decide that we would sponsor it.
I think that if we decide not to sponsor this, then it falls back to, I think, Michael Betancourt to move forward.
Right, and I don't think I personally don't think that we should.
But
we don't think that the select board has a better shot than we do. It sounds like we, as Brian mentioned, and all of the other boards have the best shot. I think I'm gonna go with that.
I think having a hearing, if we get a lot of feedback after that hearing, where it's basically, overwhelming response of this is going to be problematic, yes, we will have time. We can pull that at any point in time, and it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster between the hearing, just like it always is for any type of potentially
And
controversial.
can't we propose amendments to our own article, Brian? We can propose.
Yes.
Of course.
Okay, good. So there's that whole last month roller coaster that you were just talking about.
So what I'm
is the game to get it to success.
Just the thing, what I'm advocating for here is that, like Diab said, our hand's been pushed a little bit. If we choose, we are not voting to put this on the warrant right now. I want to make that very clear. We are not voting to put this on the warrant. We would be voting just to have a hearing about this.
I'm going to have to disagree with you a little, Brian.
Ooh.
So technically, we may not be voting to put it on the warrant, but, and I really, there are two people on the board who haven't said anything yet, and I'd like to give them the opportunity to speak. I think we are going to be voting tonight to become the prime sponsors. And that may be
You're right. Yeah.
It may be an informal statement, but it would be a statement that we would be taking responsibility for this article. Because I think if we don't decide to do that tonight,
right,
then I mean we owe it.
We're gonna miss the timing. We'll miss a hearing.
Well, we're gonna have to set up a hearing regardless for all zoning articles, right?
Well, as of right now, just very quick, the only articles we have right now are the planning board report, this potential ADU, and it doesn't look like it's prime time yet for 3.5.5, if I could say.
But the point is, Brian, it's going to be it will be on the warrant regardless.
No matter what, because Michael already put it on there as a placeholder.
Right. So
yeah.
I want to give some space to Kurt and I Ching, because I haven't heard anything from you this evening, and I think it's important. We typically on the planning board don't move forward unless we have a supermajority, and I don't know that we've ever moved forward without a unanimous vote.
Well, I mean, it sounds like I've just been doing a lot of listening, which I think is really helpful for me. What I'm sort of hearing is it doesn't feel like, even from I think some of the proponents of endorsing this, perhaps like don't necessarily feel like the timeline is appropriate to try and push this for the fall. I guess I don't totally understand, because there's a placeholder in the warrant now, why that means someone has to actually move forward with proposing it, why you can't just pull it and just defer it to the spring if we think more time would allow us to get more public input, and perhaps even just ourselves, ask a couple critical questions here and tighten up this zoning change.
So the answer is that it's going to appear on the fall warrant article regardless, because if we don't sponsor it, Michael Betancourt will.
Oh, okay. So he is saying definitively.
He is definitively, it will.
He has said that in public. He has said it in public.
He is determined that this move forward this fall.
So I can just say my own. So I guess now I'll share like my own personal thoughts. I mean, I think this is really important. I know we've talked a lot high level about this, I think, since I've at least been part of the board, and I think it's interesting. I have a handful of questions, like just based on the language that came over in advance of this meeting. And I think the comments about getting public input are really relevant. So I don't know, it just feels to me like I don't have a lot of confidence that there's going to be success in the fall with like trying to get this passed. And I think if I was going to endorse something, I'd want to feel really confident that we'd done the right homework and really put forth something that was solid.
Right. So I don't know if I can be trusted to give you the information you need, if only because I'm biased, because I was part of the group which helped rewrite this. However, the language in it is very similar. So there was a statewide initiative, a statewide ADU bill.
It's a ballot initiative.
No, it was actually coming before the legislature, and
right.
It was this close. I mean, I don't know how you can see how far apart my fingers are, but it was this close to making it through. It managed to get all the way through the third hearing, and then a single person blocked it. So the language in this article is very close to the language in the state article. And it also has been vetted by a number of very people on the ADU working group who have a lot of experience in these areas. So,
well, I guess let me, do you want me just to quickly ask my couple of questions? Do you have just to throw them out there? I know we don't have a lot of time, but maybe we have negative time, but
I just want to say, I Ching, do you have something you want to say? And then...
No, I defer to Kurt because I have been in the conversations with the working group, and so I'm familiar with these things, but I would like to let
Kurt, please go ahead then.
Sure, and we don't have to answer them tonight. I'm just going to throw a couple of these out there just based on my initial reaction. I guess one, I know, Brian, when you were describing these as targeting disabled individuals and those over the age of 62, I did notice, like, in the purpose definition, number 3 was just, I think, very simply to increase the supply of smaller rental units in Winchester, which I didn't read as having anything to do with disabilities or age. It's just literally increasing the inventory of small apartments, which I'm not opposed to. I just think that's definitely not consistent with, I guess, taking the position that this is targeted exclusively at individuals who are over 62 or disabled.
So the original language, that last number 3 was listed as an additional purpose, so that it would read the primary purposes are 1 and 2, and then there's an additional purpose.
But I think that's a good point. So, I mean, we can
rewrite it to say that.
We can deal with that one. Yeah.
But with that, well, I want to go back to Kurt. How does that feel?
I think it's fine. I think you could also just take it out, because I think that you're really trying to accomplish 1 and 2. I think you're actually not trying to accomplish number 3. And I actually think the language later really restricts it to just, or tries to restrict it to just 1 and 2. So why even confuse, why confuse the issue? Like, this isn't meant to just create small.
Right, you're setting up more targets that you have to hit, and it's a lot easier to hit 2 than 3 when you're trying to.
Right. Well, and I think what I heard too is that, like, where this sort of where this has received traction in other municipalities is where it's been focused on a very targeted population that's vulnerable.
Yeah, I think so. What that was trying to do is tie back to the housing production plan and the master plan. But I see what you're saying is it's easier to say, look, this bylaw is for these 2 populations, and that's why we're trying to do this. We're not necessarily trying to do other things. So I think that's a totally reasonable change.
Right.
Meaning to take it out. Just
to take out number 3 under purpose. And I agree.
You had some other questions, Kurt?
Yeah, my next question, and this may be like a legal question that's just obvious enough that maybe I just don't know the answer to, but what is the definition of disabled in the context of this?
We would use
I think it's a federal definition.
It would be.
We can reference that.
Yeah. I'm just wondering out loud, is there an opportunity for, this to be taken advantage of?
Right, there has to, that's been brought up in terms of enforcement. And it seems like the idea of some type of annual affidavit.
See number 9.
I saw number 9. I guess I'm wondering, like, and this is, I'm gonna really put myself out there, and this is a risk of appearing very cynical, but I think of emotional support animals now becoming just like I own rental units, and like I have tenants coming to me with like kind of notes from kind of physicians, like kind of saying they need a dog that's a medical support dog, when in reality they're just college students who want dogs. So it's like, again, put that aside. I sound very cynical. I just would be wary of people trying to take advantage of perhaps like a loose definition, within the context of this.
I'll talk very briefly. I think that the main reason, if you look at that purpose, is so that people that are looking for housing vouchers and other type of assistance, they actually need their own unit. So the idea is that people with disability to qualify for subsidy. So I don't know if we actually have to make it.
We can. Why don't we can reference
the source of the definition.
Yeah, so we can say it has to, because I know that all of these programs that people would want to take advantage of because they have this accessory unit have specific criteria. And so we can reference that. And Kathy Boyle is our member on the group who knows all too much about this stuff. So we can make sure we get that in there. And I think that's maybe we either put it in as a separate definition or we make a reference to it in the language of this. But yeah, we can tighten that up.
Right. We're already making a change to section 10 definitions. So if we add another definition there, it's just part of.
Yeah, the key is that we would refer to some other federal or state definition so that we would meet, and then that way we wouldn't. We really don't want to go creating our own definition. I think we've tried to do that.
No, they would have to qualify for subsidy in the first place.
Yeah,
that's
so
essentially what the definition would be.
Yeah.
And then
so
as we say in 9, there's an annual certification to the building department.
And that's actually something we might need to tie up or to tighten up, is to define what that certification requires.
Okay.
I'm also interested in
that it's being used in accordance with these provisions. I mean, I don't know.
So while we're to move us a little bit back, is that we have plenty of time to improve the language. So these are all very important, but I also noticed we're a 9:45.
Yeah, that's true.
And I Ching may still be on Switzerland time. So
I wanted to talk about sort of the timing too, and I do fear also not passing this, but I think the things that I'm falling back on is that this just needs a majority vote. Is that correct? Through town meeting? Correct. That's good.
This is a 51, yeah.
If we introduce it, we can reintroduce it again in the spring, improved or whatever. So those kind of things are good. I am also wary of like not really understanding the town temperature about this. I think that I've been in environments where I'm speaking to the choir, and so I would be interested in what the feedback is. So I'm glad that there is time to adjust and rethink this and add amendments and whatever. So I would be in favor of introducing this because we have several shots at it and because there doesn't seem to be an alternative.
Right.
So I think that, I mean, we've never done this before in my years on the board, which are not many, but still enough, I guess. I don't know where I'm going with that. But so I would like to have a voice vote or a roll call vote, just so that it's in the record. So it's in the minutes, because otherwise we give Nancy something to write down. So I think, and since I think the motion would be that the planning board assume lead sponsorship of the ADU bylaw article for fall 22 town meeting. And that would just be it.
Yes, that would be a potential vote that would allow me to advertise for the zoning hearing as early as looks like it'd potentially be October 11th, about a month before, a month before town meeting. However, we could start passing this around to any and everybody for comment right now.
Right.
So if someone would make that motion.
I would make that motion.
And
I do make that motion.
Well, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote. Nick.
Aye.
I Ching.
Aye.
Kurt.
Can I ask a question before I?
Yes, sorry. There's time for discussion. I apologize.
Just be clear, because I have a couple more like comments and questions on this. So we're basically, what we're doing with this vote is we're gonna agree to take ownership of this for fall town meeting, but there's going to be definitively be time in the interim for us to debate this a little bit more. When I say debate, fine tune the intent and the language of this before it actually gets presented.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, so just to be clear, it would be presented on the 11th of October as a hearing. And typically between that hearing and town meeting, yes, there's fine tuning, there's new comments, there's legal counsel review, or further review. But yes, there is time to change from the draft that you're looking at right now. may look very different on the town meeting floor. Or I shouldn't say very different, different.
It will look different. It may look different. And I'm hoping that the working group will provide enough background to understand some of the subtleties of the language that's in there.
Right,
And
we have a background statement now that I started to look at and edit, and
Yeah,
it needs a lot of work.
So we're in the middle of a vote, and I'm sorry to have brought that up. But yes, there will be time, Kurt. So.
And there's
So-
also even an option to fully pull it, even up to town meeting.
Definitely, definitely. That is still on the table to if we can see which way the wind is blowing between the 11th and November 8th, I believe, is the first night of town meeting. November 8th, it's a Thursday. So there's definitely time, and it's not out of the realm of possibility if we just get a lot of comments from a lot of people, and that we can't change it in time or try to do that. We can pull it totally. We can pull it even at town meeting.
And do we have time at our next meeting to talk, like basically to address this before something gets published?
the
for the
11th?
11th?
Well,
That
the
might
language
be.
is, yeah, so the language is,
So we would have to add another meeting. We took out the meeting for October 4th because it's the first night of Yom Kippur. So typically boards and committees don't meet on that night. So as of right now, we are not meeting before the 11th. However, between, after the 11th, we can make a whole bunch of changes.
Well, can I suggest one change right now before we take the final
we're
vote? or should
in
we
the
take
middle of
final
a vote, so.
Well, yeah, right now the vote is to be the lead sponsor.
Does it have to be a unanimous vote? Well, I think was.
I
I
would-
withdraw
Typically,
the
it's
question.
It's four. We need a super
We need
majority,
it, I mean, so traditionally, it's been a super majority.
which is
and,
four.
and which is 4. And
Aye.
I
Sorry, should I vote now? Aye.
well, you
I have more
we
questions.
can hold
but
off until
I'm
the end,
in
Kurt.
favor.
We can hold off to the end if
Well,
you'd like.
we-
'cause
No,
it-
no, I'm in. I just have more. I think my last question is like, I would love, I think, either to share a couple more questions or have another conversation with the appropriate person about this, whether it's offline, over email.
No,
Just I don't know what the right approach is, but
you can-
Sure. As of right now, I think we've already somewhat even agreed to the few changes that you've proposed right now. Just so we're clear, is that the draft
Yeah.
that could go out for the hearing would not include that, number 3 would have a note about a definition of what disability is. So those right now, we've already talked about them. They can be incorporated without anything further.
So the answer is Kurt, yes, you can speak to, if you want to talk to Brian,
not to Brian. Okay.
or you can talk to me, because, I'm on you can talk to I Ching, who's been on the ADU working group.
Okay.
If you want to talk to, we have a meeting this Friday at 10, if you want to show up and ask your questions there. There are plenty of time.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm with the team. Aye.
Okay, so Kurt says yes.
You're the last
Okay.
one, DM.
No, we have to go to Sally. Sally has.
She proposed. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I motioned it. I moved it,
Motioned
but I
it.
have to
So
vote
you-
for it too.
And you're
I
voting
do.
yes, Sally, and I vote yes as well. Okay, so
What about
Um,
Nick?
What
I
about
voted.
what?
He
Nick
voted.
was number 1. Nick
Oh,
got the first vote. I'm moving across my screen, so it's a strange order. It's like a snake. Okay, so
It's late.
we are definitely past our bedtime. So I thank you for sticking. I think we had a really great meeting today for a number of different reasons. So we are having we've got a meeting with the Design Review Committee coming up in October. So it'll be another joint meeting with them. I know we still have to do some housekeeping. We still have to reach out and set up that working group between historical and planning to talk
Right.
about education. So let's not forget that. It's
Yeah, I
easy
think
to
so.
set
I
that
think an
group.
email went out, and we're still working on getting
Okay,
everyone to
excellent.
be available.
Okay,
Great.
so with that, ADU
And
working
Brian, I'm
group.
gonna email you one suggested edit, it's very minor,
Okay.
it's just a word order thing.
Okay, So I think a motion to adjourn, and thank you, Brian Manter, for sticking out, and Richard Leaf and Dorothy
Richard
Simboli
Leaf,
and Rich
and
Rohan.
Nancy Polcari and Richard
Nancy
Rowan.
Polcari. But a motion to adjourn, please.
So move.
Is there a second?
Sure.
I second.
Excellent. Roll call vote. Kurt,
Aye.
I Ching,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
and I say aye as well. Thank you very much. Thank you to WinCam. Thank you to Brian Zakelli, town, what's your role today? Planner, Brian Manter, Assistant Town Engineer, Nancy Polcari, Recording Secretary, all the people from the ZBA, and everyone out there in TV land. We will see you. I don't know when we'll see you next. It'll be soon.
October
Talk
11th.
to you later.
Okay.
Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.